You are listening to the Chromebook Classroom Interview Series, the podcast devoted to helping you develop your Chromebook classroom. Here's your host, John Sowash.
Today's edition of the Chromebook Classroom podcast is international. We'll be traveling to both Australia and Cambodia. My guest is Bob Gregory, the Education Director for Transform Cambodia, an NGO dedicated to helping educate the youth of Cambodia. And we're going to be discussing how this organization is using Chromebooks to increase the educational opportunities for these students. One of the things that I love about Chromebooks and Google's vision behind the Chromebook is how they are able to impact so many different areas of the world and economic situations because of their affordability and ease of management. This is a short conversation. Hopefully you'll be encouraged with the potential of technology to impact education. Well, I'm excited for this international edition of the Chromebook Classroom podcast. Bob, welcome to the show. Tell us about yourself and Transform Cambodia.
Well, thanks, John. It's great to be with you, and thank you for the invitation. It's terrific to be able to share in this kind of a podcast. A little bit about Transform Cambodia. Started in 2006. We started with about 85 kids, but over the next 10 years, we built up to about 3,000. We're about 3,300 now, with 33 centres located around Phnom Penh. And we really have a mission to reach out to the poorest kids in Cambodia and give them hope. Not too many people are actively aware of what Pol Pot did to Cambodia back in those dark years of their history. But our mission is to try and replace some of the intellectual and social capital that got robbed from the country during that period of time. And we're doing that by getting these kids that have got no hope and giving them hope, because they can develop up to be excellent young men and women.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've traveled internationally quite a bit, primarily in Eastern Europe, to a lot of former communist countries, and what I've observed there, Romania, Serbia, Kosovo, some of those places, is you've got the very educated, the wealthy in the country, and then you've got extremely poor, but there really is very little middle class in a lot of these countries. This sounds kind of like what you're saying is, there's just these extremes where you either have it or you don't, and making that transition is difficult. Is that an accurate kind of summary?
Yes, look, I think you'll find that's really the case in almost every third world country, and Cambodia is no exception. There's a huge amount of wealth in the nation. The biggest challenge, of course, for those that live in the country is how do they manage to share that wealth in an equitable manner, and that's part of what Transform is about, is actually giving these kids the skills to acquire eventually to acquire the employment that will enable that poverty cycle to be broken. Mm-hmm. And we are actually seeing that happen as we speak, and that's one of the really encouraging things about being involved in this program.
And you have a long history in education, so you are not currently in Cambodia. Tell us a little bit about your background and what eventually led you to Cambodia.
Well, I started as a teacher, back in the late 60s, and then, of course, got married, and our kids came along. And as we looked at what the options were for our own children for education, we started thinking, we're not all that happy with the sort of offerings that were around at the time. So my wife and I, along with some friends of ours, started our own school called Thornley Christian College. We built that for the next 15 or so years, and I ultimately became the principal of that college. I was at the same time pastoring in a church, not the senior pastor. I was an associate pastor responsible for education in the church, but we also, in parallel, ran the school, and that gave me an insight into a few key factors, I suppose, in the sorts of things that we're doing now. But long story short, that that school ran on a program called Accelerated Christian Education, and we chose that by having done due diligence on all the available offerings. We felt that for what we needed at the time, that one was the best. So we chose to go with that. But about 1998 or thereabouts, we saw some cracks beginning to appear in the distribution cycle of the program, and at the end of 1999, I was requested to come over to Queensland, where the company was located in Australia, and to take over as the CEO and ultimately the managing director of the company, which I did. And so for the next 20 years, I spent my time distributing that material and then running educators' conferences, teaching teachers about individualised learning and how that fits into the landscape of a rounded education. And so that's my background.
Yeah, and in case you couldn't tell, Bob is from Australia. Currently you're in Perth, I think you said?
Perth in Western Australia, that's correct. I did shift back from Queensland actually just a few months ago, in April this year. But that was mainly for family reasons.
Got it. One day, hopefully, I'll make it over there. So Bob was kind enough to join me very early in the morning for me, and very pretty late in his day across the world. So thank you. Well, let's talk a little bit more about Transform Cambodia. I mean, this is the Chromebook Classroom podcast, and if you're listening right now at this point in our conversation, you'd be like, John, why are we talking about Cambodia? And originally, Bob reached out to me a month or so ago. He somehow got a hold of my book, The Chromebook Classroom, and Transform is in the process of providing Chromebooks to their students to enhance their educational program. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to the conclusion that we should get technology, and then specifically Chromebooks, for these kids?
When I took over as the education manager for Transform Cambodia in 2016, one of the things that both surprised and devastated me was the lack of content in the program that they had available to them. And so we began looking around for how we could enhance their education without having to go through the process of writing new material or that kind of thing. So we looked around to see what was available, and we settled on a program called Future School. Now, obviously, if you've got an online program, you need a device by which to deliver that program, and there are several different ways, of course, that you can deliver online programs. You can do one-to-many, like you can have one projection onto a screen, for example, and the whole class sees that projection at the one time, but then does the exercises in their book. We weren't satisfied with that. We felt that we needed to try and move toward an environment where we have one device per student, or at least one device for a small group of students. And so we're working actually in all three of those modes at the moment. When we looked at what device would be the best to deliver an online program, we first of all thought about using perhaps tablets, Android tablets. But I investigated that, and what I discovered was that when you have a keyboard that covers half your screen, and then you've got kids trying to answer exercises that are shown on the screen, it becomes a bit of a challenge to manage that device. And so we came to the conclusion that we needed a keyboard that was separate from the screen, which led us toward netbooks, and so I started investigating netbooks. But then I came across a gentleman actually who he lives in Malaysia, but he services Cambodia specifically with Google Chromebooks. So we got together and had a chat about what our needs were, and we managed to source some devices that were within a range that we thought was affordable for our organisation. And so it went from there. We started rolling out the Chromebooks into our organisation and training the staff and the kids on how to use them.
Yeah, it's a really interesting process, and people in the United States are having the same conversations and thoughts, trying to figure out what devices is the right one. And tablets are interesting. I mean, there's definitely advantages to tablets in terms of creating multimedia, the touch screen, but depending on what you're trying to do, the lack of a physical keyboard is a challenge. And, as a former school administrator myself, thinking about purchasing and also managing external, separate keyboards and batteries and connecting them and just dealing with that doesn't sound too exciting to me. So I think a lot of schools are coming to that conclusion that for certain types of work, that a device with a attached keyboard definitely has advantages. So you've got about 3,000 students in the program, and we were chatting before we started recording a little bit about the educational system. Is very, very interesting, kind of unique. I've seen this in other Eastern European countries as well. Tell me again. So they actually have a split day. So they have like a morning group of students and then an afternoon group of students. Explain that to everyone, and then how Transform fits into to that education system.
Okay, thanks, John. In Cambodia, the education department splits the school day in half, and they run 2 shifts in each school. That has obvious advantages. It minimises the number of campuses that they have to have in order to cater for the number of children that are going to school. But the first shift starts very early, starts about 7 o'clock and goes until lunchtime, and then the second shift starts at lunchtime and then goes till late in the afternoon. So that's how they fit their 2 shifts in. So what Transform Cambodia does is it takes these kids, and we actually pay the fees for them to go to school. In primary school, that's a diminished amount because it's meant to be free. But of course, as everybody who's in a government school system knows, it's never free. However, for the older kids, we found that the government system really wasn't serving our needs at all well. And so we now pay for them to go to a private school in secondary. So we've got 1,400 or 1,500 kids in secondary school at the moment. And so they go to their school in the morning. Then in the afternoon, we take them into our Transform centres, and we
a picture of some of the centres here from your website.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Yeah, they in the centres we teach them life skills. We enhance their education and try and build them up to replace some of the intellectual capital that was removed, during those dark years of their history.
So you have, you said about 100 students per center, 50 in the morning, and then 50 in the afternoon. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And then how do the Chromebooks fit into what you're trying to accomplish there?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we actually use 3 different methodologies in presenting to our students. In some of the younger centres, we will project the material to them as a group, and they will respond in their workbooks, and they will learn together as a whole class. But as they get older, we then develop smaller groups of 5 students, 3, 4 or 5, depending on the makeup of that particular cohort, and they will share a Chromebook between them. We have an audio splitter and sets of headphones for each of the kids, and so they all listen to the same tutorial. And then, if they're working as a group like that, then they also answer in their notebooks, and it's done that way. But then in our older centres, particularly kids with year 11 and 12 we have one Chromebook per student, and they work one-on-one, just going through the material as they're able to achieve success on their current topic.
Yeah, I want to talk about that middle one, that group work for a minute. A lot of schools are, very interested in becoming one-to-one, which certainly has advantages, and I don't think that's a bad goal. However, as I've observed students, I would say that students really enjoy that 2-to-1 scenario, 2 students with 1 device, because it really enhances that social learning. And they can work and chat and kind of bounce ideas off one another. So I've seen that as a very effective strategy. So, if you're listening, your school, doesn't have the funding to go fully one-to-one, there's a lot of effective things that you can do. If you have 2, can do 3, but really two students per device is optimal. That way everyone is, being able to contribute to some extent. So that's really neat. Now, I know you're still rolling this program out. You said you've done about three of your centers so far. Deployed.
Well, no, we've actually got devices into 14 of our centres. Okay. This academic year, which of course you would be aware, being in the US, starts in September. We're now rolling them out to an additional 6 centres. So we're actually just yesterday took delivery of another delivery of Chromebooks to populate our centres 15 through 20. So they've got sufficient devices to set our small groups up.
Yeah, nice. Now, tell me about what device did you end up going with? Is it the same device for all the centres?
We are trying to use the same device with all centres, but we're having a little difficulty with supply, and we have experienced some difficulty with the robustness of the actual device. It's probably not appropriate on this kind of a program to name the devices, but the ones we actually went with initially were recycled devices that came out of the US. And we found that they were very vulnerable with their charging port. We had hosts of those devices have to go back for repair because of problems with charging. But they just weren't as robust as what we would have liked to see them. So we have actually now sourced a Tier 2 computer manufacturer in Shenzhen in China who is producing very, very good, very high quality machines, and they're a bit more expensive, but we feel that it's worth it to get the value for the kids in the long run.
Yeah,
and in fact, we actually. Sorry, John, I'm interrupting you there, but I was just going to say we actually did our figures and found out and discovered it probably will cost us less in the long run because the maintenance cost is going to be lower.
Right. Absolutely. A lot of schools have wrestled with that equation as well. And I would also say that the first and even the second generation of Chromebooks did have issues with screen hinges, the charging ports. The manufacturers have gotten a lot better at designing devices for the bumps and drops of a school that you can expect in a school environment. So, I'd say that third, the fourth, the Chromebooks that are being manufactured currently tend to eliminate a lot of those common issues. It's good. Interesting. Now, I'm curious. I mean, it's pretty significant deployment, especially given the number of physical centers that you have. I mean, it's not uncommon to see a school deploy 3,000 Chromebooks, but they tend to be, within a building or a couple buildings. Tell me two questions, opposite ends for me. Tell me, as you've deployed these, anything that you have been pleasantly surprised by in terms of, Chromebooks really made it easy, or also any things that, perhaps we've discovered already, kind of, the breakage and durability aspect, but anything that you would recommend that a school administrator consider as they are thinking about a Chromebook program such as yours?
Okay, a couple of things, and I hope these are within the scope of what you're actually asking me, John, but first up, one of the things that was a challenge for us was bandwidth. Because a Chromebook obviously is an online device, you can't just have an ordinary ADSL, connection. And what I discovered as a very pleasant surprise in Phnom Penh is that it's very, very well serviced with high-speed fibre optic cable. So nice. We were able to connect our centres that are using the Chromebooks with 60 megabits per second bandwidth fibre optic, which works very well with them. So that was a very good surprise to us that we were actually able to do that, and it really dealt with a lot of the delay problems and so on. So that was a good surprise. It wasn't a surprise to us, but very, very pleasant anyway to see that the kids learn very well using the Chromebooks. They gravitated to the programs very well and seemed to enjoy using the material. So that's also very good. On the negative side, of course, are the challenges of physical security, safety of the books themselves and their durability, but also things like their cyber security, that kind of stuff. We're still working out how we do that in the best way. And I'm actually sure you'll have some advice for us.
Yeah, well, there's always challenges. Every school is dealing with that. I mean, if you're a classroom teacher and the idea of handing a student a device that's connected to the internet doesn't freak you out a little bit, then you probably haven't thought enough about it, because I mean, with all of the good does come all of the bad. Yes. I mean, the internet is a wonderful and a terrifying place, and it is our responsibility, especially school administrators, to do what we can to protect our students and devices from some of those threats, with the understanding that, we can do as much as we can, but any motivated individual will be able to subvert it if they truly want to. That's the challenge that we face. U.S. is no different. Typically, in every school, there's at least one student who is a aspiring computer hacker. And so, if you want to know what your security vulnerabilities are, just ask them, and they'll be able to point it out to them. My recommendation is that you then hire them or make them a part of your internal IT department, because they're probably better than anyone else at finding and exposing those security flaws. Now, tell me about your teachers who are working in the centers. What are they doing to utilize these devices? What challenges are they facing, and opportunities as well?
That's a good question, John. As we were chatting earlier on before we came on the air, we don't employ teachers in our centres because we don't perceive ourselves as a primary educational institution. We are a support institution, or a coaching or a mentoring institution, more so than a primary educational institution. So we don't employ teachers. We call our staff trainers, and their job is to actually be the ones to build the kids up, encourage them, mentor them, grow them socially, emotionally, and sort of in their security and then in their life skills, and then point them in the right direction when it comes to working with their academic work. So one of the things I say to them when I'm up there training with them is, look, you guys don't have to know all the answers, but you do have to know where to go to find them.
Sure.
And so we spend a lot of time on teaching the trainers up there how to lead the kids into places where they can get the answers they need for the work they're doing.
Absolutely. And you were telling me that just helping the teacher or your coaches keep up with the changes in technology, how to use these devices is one of the challenges that you face. Do you provide professional development? What does that kind of learning program look like for them?
We have two major training programs through each year. And then I do ad hoc training as the need arises. In fact, I'll probably need to go up there next week. We're completely revamping our content for our future school program, and so I've got to train them in what that means and how to handle it, and in fact, even how to prepare for it in many regards. So we do training is one of the main platforms actually of what we do, because we have to make sure that our trainers in all of the areas where they're involved, the education program is only one of them. There's all sorts of other areas of their involvement also, and so we need to keep making sure that they understand their part in that process. So introducing them to new devices. Most of them are to some degree computer literate. I've been pleasantly surprised to the extent of technology development up in the country, but their knowledge and their exposure to it doesn't go very deep, and so it does mean quite a lot of extensive training for them to make sure they really understand the tool they're using.
Sure. And I'm curious, what's access to technology like in the traditional Cambodian schools?
The ones that I've seen, and I would be the first one to say I'm not an expert on conventional Cambodian schools, but the ones that I've seen is that it would indicate that access to technology is actually very limited, very, very low level. That's one of the reasons for the supplier that we've been connected to doing his business in Cambodia, because his mission is to try and educate them on the value of technology into their schools. And we're actually doing our part to try and improve that in the schools that our children are attending.
Sure. Interesting. Yeah. Well, this is a great opportunity for those kids. Now, you've been doing this for a few years now. What types of success, as you've had students move through your program, do you have any stories of students who have, kind of been successful?
Yeah. We have had. We've got students now that are studying medicine at university that are studying quite a range of different schools at university, and we're really thrilled about that. They've not all excelled on their final exams when they've left high school, but they've found a way to get into their universities. We had 17 graduate at the end of the last school year, and then the end of this immediately past school year we had 37 graduate. And we're currently working with them to look for placement for them into their preferred area of tertiary entrance. So we're quite happy with how that's going. We're certainly not satisfied with it, but that will get better as time goes on.
Sure. That's great. Cool. Well, I've got just a couple quick final questions I always ask at the end of my shows to my guests. First one, very, very important question. Tell us about your current wallpaper on your computer. What have you got on there?
On my computer, I have space images from the Hubble telescope.
All right. So you're an outer space fan?
Well, not so much an outer space fan. I actually am an avowed creationist.
Got it.
And so I love the thought that God spoke that into existence.
Sure. Well, it certainly it helps you identify your place, your role in the universe when you look at those pictures, for sure. Interesting. Sure does, that's fun. Yeah. That's cool. So another important question: how many tabs do you currently have open?
Oh gosh, I would have probably 10.
All right, not too bad. Not too bad. Usually it's, plus or minus 10 is kind of the, like, if you have less than 10, then you're pretty type A, organized personality. If you're more than 10, then trying to load all the internet up. And then I'm curious, do you use Chrome extensions?
Look, yeah, I do use some. Chrome actually, I've how can I put this in perspective for you? I came to the conclusion, even before we started using Chromebooks, that Chrome was the best internet browser to use. And so I've stuck with that, and I've used Chrome extensions, and I've got several of them, on my system right at the moment. But it really only has been since we've introduced Chromebooks into the Transform Cambodia centres that I've actually become interested in looking more into what Google has in terms of its educational support system. And I'm really on quite a heavy learning curve in that regard because I've all of my attention has previously been in other areas. So
sure, absolutely.
I certainly have a lot to learn.
It's a interesting program. I think it fools people, Chrome, into thinking that, it's just a browser, no big deal. But there's a tremendous amount of things that you can do with it. I'll give you an interesting one to check out that might be of interest. We've been talking about this one a little bit. It's called Sir Links-a-Lot. Which is an extension, and it works really well if you're sharing and using a lot of Google Drive files, docs, sheets, because if I'll give someone a lesson plan that they really like, I don't want to give them access to my original. I want them to make a copy of it. So Links-a-Lot allows me to send them a special URL that will force them to make a copy or give them a template of my original rather than using my actual file. So that's one of my favorites. I'll put the link to it in the show notes. So you can check it out. It's got a funny name, if nothing else.
Well, sounds great.
Bob, I want to appreciate you coming on and sharing some info about Transform Cambodia. If there are teachers, administrators, students, listeners who would like to learn more about the program, where can we send them?
Well, the primary source of information, of course, as you've already discovered, John, is our website, and pretty much everything they need to know about us is available there. That's just www.transformcambodia.com. Anything else, if they want to go further, there are links on the website where they can make contact with us, and they can take it from there. Yeah,
I was looking. You've got some cool stuff on your Facebook page, or some neat videos that kind of highlight some of the things that we've chatted about. But it is a beautiful website, by the way. Nicely done. I'd encourage anyone who's interested to check it out. And I'll link to all their contact info in the show notes for this episode. You can get those by heading over to chrmbook.com/podcast. And just look for this episode with Bob and myself. Well, Bob, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. And thank you for listening, everyone. If you're enjoying the show, I'd be grateful if you would head over to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher and leave a review. I appreciate that. Your review also helps other educators discover the show as well. For more Chromebook tips, tricks, lesson plans, and ideas, you can head over to chrmbook.com. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Chromebook Classroom interview series with John Sowash. Get show notes, new episodes, and more at chrmbook.com/podcast.